Hi everyone, my name is Anne and I'm an Education Abroad Peer Ambassador. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about budgeting while abroad. Before we begin, I'd like to give you guys an idea of my experience abroad. I am a Chinese Studies and Spanish major, so I was able to study abroad 3 times. My programs were fairly varied in terms of cost of living and length. I went on one summer program in Hangzhou, a semester-long program in Beijing, and a semester-long program in Granada. I lived in both dormitory-style accommodations and a homestay while I was abroad, so I know a little about the differences as far as meals, transportation, and other expenses that go along with living in a different type of accommodation. There are several things you need to do before you leave the country. First, you need to call your bank. Let them know the dates and places that you will be studying abroad. Remember, if your trip includes multiple locations, you'll need to give the dates and places for each one. This will be just the country, you don't need to give them the specific cities. Sometimes, though, they will also ask you which airports you will be traveling through, so it's good to have that information with you when you make the call. Also, if you don't want to call them for some reason, some banks and credit unions have an online portal where you can fill out this information. This will be especially useful if you decide to go on a trip while you're abroad and you need to update your information of where you'll be, because that way you can just update it online and you won't have to make a long distance call. After telling them about your travel plans, you'll need to ask them several questions about withdrawing money while abroad. First, ask them what the withdrawal limit per day is, and then ask what fees you'll incur each time you take out money from a foreign ATM. Most banks charge either a flat fee or a percentage fee, and which type your bank uses will determine how much money you'll withdraw at a time. If it's a flat fee, which means, for example, that your bank will charge you $5 every time you take out money, regardless of the amount, then it's better to take out more money each time so that you don't lose a lot of money to ATM fees. That being said, if they charge a percentage, for example, 1% of the cash taken out of the machine, then you can take out whatever amount at whatever time you want, and it won't make a difference. You should ask them if they have any partner banks abroad. If your bank has a partner bank in the country where you're going, you can use one of their ATMs to withdraw money, and you either may not have to pay any fees or you can pay a reduced fee. ATM fees do add up quickly even over the course of a summer program, so all of this is something that you should definitely know. After you call your bank, if you plan to use a credit card while abroad, you should call your credit card company. You'll be giving them similar information and asking similar types of questions. First, you'll let them know the dates and times that you will be abroad. Again, you may be able to fill out this information online, and also you'll want to ask what the international transaction fees will be. International transaction fees are a percentage charged for every dollar spent abroad, usually between 1 and 3%. Obviously, it isn't necessarily an option if you're going on a summer program because you'll be leaving soon, but if you want to use your credit card abroad and you're studying abroad later in the summer or in the fall, you may want to apply for a card that waives the international transaction fee. So again, you don't spend money that you don't need to. If your bank or credit card company has a smartphone app, you might want to download it before you go abroad, because that way you won't have to make long distance calls, and if you're not bringing your laptop, you'll have that information right on your smartphone. If you are going to be abroad for a longer period of time, say a semester or even a full year, it might be worth it to open a foreign bank account. This is going to depend on which country you're going to, because it may or may not be a convenient or even possible option. Some countries do not allow students to open bank accounts. If you do decide to open a bank account, what will happen is that you'll wire transfer funds to the account one time for a fee, and then you'll be able to withdraw money from that account for no fee for the rest of your stay. You do want to make sure that you have multiple sources of funds while you are abroad. Usually, students will withdraw cash using their debit card as their primary source of funds, but it is also good to have a credit card or travel money card to use for emergencies. Cash is used a lot more widely in other countries than it is in the US, so you won't be using your credit card as much as you might think. There are benefits and limitations of each method that you will want to keep in mind. Cash, again, is the most widely accepted, but if you carry a lot of it on your person and you lose it or it gets stolen, it's gone. Debit cards and credit cards are more safer in this respect, and they are more convenient, but they are not as widely accepted. Before you leave, do make sure that you make copies of the front and back of your debit and credit cards. It's always good to leave one copy of this information with the same trusted friend or family member that you will give the photocopies of your passport to, and to also take one set of copies with you and keep them with your other important papers. You will want to make sure you have both the card number and the bank or company's phone number in case the cards are lost or stolen. It is also important to note that you should not bring a lot of American cash with you, because as soon as you arrive in your host country, you will no longer be able to use the US dollar. Before you leave the airport, you should go to an ATM and withdraw some cash, because if you take a taxi, bus, or subway away from the airport, then you will need some of the host currency in order to pay your fare, and you will also need the host currency in order to pay for anything from that point out. Also, withdrawing cash from the ATM is the most effective way of getting money, because if you bring cash and then try to change it at the airport at one of the kiosks, you will not get as favorable of an exchange rate. For the exchange rate between the host country and the US dollar, you can just Google it and write it down, but you can also use an app such as the XE Currency app. The exchange rate is how much local currency you can get for the equivalent of $1 US. Don't spend too much time trying to convert the exact amount that you will pay for each item, but try to memorize key amounts. For example, $1 US could be X amount in the local currency, while $20 US could be Y amount in the local currency, etc. Also, since the exchange rate often includes a lot of decimals, it might help to just round down the amount of local currency that is the equivalent of $1 US. For example, when I studied abroad in Beijing, $1 US at that point was equal to 6.32 renminbi, so I just used the ratio of 1 to 6 when calculating purchases. So, for example, if I bought something that was 36 renminbi, I knew that I was spending the equivalent of $6 US. This seems like it would all be really complicated or make it inconvenient to go shopping, but don't worry about it, because after just a little amount of time in the country, you will be able to complete the calculation automatically, and you'll also just know if an item is expensive or not, because you'll get a feel for the cost of living. One thing to keep in mind while you are abroad is that foreign currency may seem like fake money or monopoly money at first, which makes it easier to spend uncontrollably. So make sure that you're always keeping in mind that you're spending real money and that you're keeping track of your purchases. Before you go abroad, you need to think about how much money you have for this experience. First, add up all of the money that you will have to spend while you are abroad, such as money from savings, money from different types of financial aid such as scholarships or loans, and family contributions. One thing to keep in mind is that if your program starts before the University of Kentucky term does, your financial aid may not post to your account until after you are abroad, so it's always good to be in contact with the financial aid office so that you know what specific date those funds will be available. Once you know how much money you have to spend while you are abroad, you'll want to start thinking about your expenses. For the purpose of this webinar, I have divided the expenses into 3 main types. The first is necessary expenses, which includes items such as food, transportation, toiletries, and either a cell phone or cell phone plan. There are also additional expenses, which are not necessary but will vary depending on what you want to spend. These include independent travel, excursions with friends, souvenirs, and going out. Finally, it's good to set aside a certain amount of money for emergency expenses. These things aren't very likely, but it's always better to be prepared. For example, if you leave your phone behind somewhere, you'll need to get a replacement. Or if you miss a flight or a train, you'll want to be able to purchase an alternate ticket to be able to get back to your main city. As far as necessary expenses, first you need to think about pre-departure expenses. You will need to buy some supplies before you go abroad, but avoid the temptation to buy all new everything before you go, such as an all-new wardrobe, all-new shoes, etc. You do need to think about practical supplies such as backpacks, adapters and converters for your electronics, water bottles, etc. For more information about what you should pack when you're going abroad, we also have a Packing Abroad webinar that you can view on the Education Abroad YouTube page. Before you go to the airport, make sure that you go to the website of the airline through which you bought your ticket and check the dimensions of the suitcase that you are allowed for both checked and carry-on luggage. You don't want to have to spend extra money because your luggage is either too big or because it weighs too much. Also, some airlines will make you pay for even your first checked bag, so you'll want to make sure that you include the cost of checking a bag into your budget if that is going to be necessary. As far as other expenses, housing is going to vary depending on the type of program. Some programs will have housing charges included in the cost, and you don't have to worry about them once you have paid the cost for the entire program. For other programs, like exchange or direct programs, the estimated housing costs were included in the budget page. It may vary how you pay your rent. You may pay it at the beginning of the semester, or you may pay it in monthly installments. As far as food, you will also want to think about what your program includes. Some programs include 3 meals per day. Others may just include breakfast or lunch, and you'll be responsible for dinner. Other programs may include no meals, and you'll be responsible for getting all of your food on your own. So make sure you know what is included in your program. Your philosophy about food will also impact how much money you will need. If you're a foodie, you will probably need to budget more. If food isn't as important to you, then you may not need to spend as much because you will not be going to restaurants as much. Use sites such as Numbeo to get a cost of living. Usually these sites will list how much, for example, a meal at a fancy restaurant, a meal at a budget restaurant costs, as well as the price of everyday items such as milk or bread. Also, it's a good idea to read blogs by expats and other study abroad students who have lived in the country, because a lot of times they will mention how much money they have spent on food. And again, estimate high, but know that the cost that you will spend on food will vary on your choices. You will also need to think about local transportation. Ask yourself how far away you will be from your classes. If you are living on the university campus, you will not need to budget as much for local transportation because you'll be able to walk to your classes. That being said, if you live in an apartment, you may have to budget enough money to take the metro or the bus every day. If it's walking distance, you won't need to spend any money, but think about what different options are available to you. Maybe you could rent a bike, or maybe you could compare the cost and convenience of taking the metro versus the bus. Another expense that you need to think about are cell phones. There are multiple ways to approach staying connected while abroad. First, you can bring your US phone abroad with a US international cell phone plan. Talk to your provider to find out the specifics of these costs. This is usually the most expensive option. Some providers charge per call, text, or gigabyte of data, or some may have plans where you have a certain amount of data or minutes that you can't go over. This may be ideal for short-term programs if you don't want to deal with arranging other cell phone plans while you're abroad. But again, it is the most expensive and you will usually not have as many minutes or as much data available to you. You can also bring your US phone abroad and use Wi-Fi only access. The benefit of this is that it is the cheapest option because Wi-Fi is usually free, either at your dormitory or your university or at different establishments such as cafes or restaurants. But the disadvantage is that you will only be connected at certain times when you have Wi-Fi. Before you go abroad, you will need to make sure that your US cell phone is unlocked. Again, call your provider and ask them if your cell phone is already unlocked, or you can ask them to unlock it. Once your cell phone is unlocked, you have the option of buying a local SIM card when you are abroad. This is more ideal for mid to long-term programs because it will be cheaper and you will get more data. Keep in mind that some SIM cards will only include data and minutes for calls made within the host country, so make sure you know if you have the option of buying an international plan if you plan to make calls home. You can also rent a phone from some programs. Make sure that you understand the charges, as this may be a more expensive option. It's usually very convenient because you don't have to worry about losing your American phone while you're abroad, and these will have SIM cards from the country already installed. If it's not available to rent a phone from your program, consider buying a local phone. It is an upfront cost, and again is good if you don't want to bring your American cell phone while you're abroad, and another benefit is that it is often pay as you go. Just like using Wi-Fi only access, there are also advantages and disadvantages of cellular access. The benefit is that you are always able to communicate. The disadvantage is that it's more complicated as there are a variety of options and cost, and you will need to do research based on the country and program length. That being said, even if you do use a phone plan, there are multiple ways to stay in contact that are free. Apps such as WhatsApp, Skype, FaceTime, iMessage, Google Talk or Chat are good for staying in contact with friends and family back home. Usually there are also country-specific apps that you can use to stay in touch with the new friends that you make while abroad. For example, WhatsApp is really popular in Spain and it can be used just using the Wi-Fi. Also, always keep in mind that email is an option for staying in contact with people back home. In addition, there are also miscellaneous everyday items that you will need to account for. You will probably buy shampoo, toothpaste, etc. once you get to the country. And depending on the length of time in your program, you will probably need to buy these items more than once. Depending on what is included in your program or how long you are abroad, you might have to purchase other items such as dishes, bedding, etc. There are also other recurring expenses. These are usually more associated with being abroad for an extended period of time, such as a semester or a year. That being said, you may need to pay for such things as laundry, gym memberships, etc. Also, keep in mind that ATM fees can add up. In addition to the necessary expenses, there will also be additional expenses while abroad. These are called additional expenses because you do not have to spend money on them, but they will enrich your study abroad experiences. This includes going to restaurants or sightseeing, independent travel, souvenirs or shopping, and going out. Before you go abroad, it's good to think about what kind of spender you are. For example, you might be a traveler, someone who's excited to travel and wants to go to a lot of different places while you're abroad. You might be a foodie, someone who appreciates a good meal. You could be a culture vulture, someone who loves to visit museums and historical sites. A shopper who likes purchasing local items such as clothes or souvenirs. Or a partier, someone who enjoys going out. This will help you prioritize what you want to spend money on while you're abroad so that you avoid spending money on things that you don't have to. Make sure that after you deduct the money that you will be spending on necessary and emergency expenses, you think about how much money you will have left over and make a budget for additional expenses so you know how much you have to spend while you're abroad. Finally, there are emergency expenses that come up every once in a while. You cannot predict emergencies, but you can plan for them. Make sure you have some money set aside in your bank account for situations like the ones that I listed in the other slide, such as if you lose your cell phone, miss a flight, etc. Emergency funds can be cash, a credit card with a higher balance, or another option. In case you lose your debit card, it's a good idea that once you're in your host country, you withdraw an amount of cash that you feel comfortable with and hide it in your dorm or homestay in case you lose your wallet or debit or credit card. This amount will vary depending on the location of your program, but it is a good idea to make sure that it is enough to tide you over until you get a replacement card. Now that you've thought about how much money you have to spend and what expenses you need to plan for, here are some ways that you can cut down on costs while you are abroad. As far as necessary expenses go, there's really no way to cut down on pre-departure expenses or housing expenses. This is going to be either a set cost or it's going to depend on your personal preferences. But for food, there are a lot of ways that you can save money while you're abroad. One, if it's possible, buy your food from the grocery store. If you live in an apartment or some dormitories, you may be able to cook in the kitchen, but for other types of accommodations, you may just be buying types of snacks. Don't buy more than you plan to eat, but eat all the food that you buy. It's very money wasting to buy food at a grocery store and then go out to eat and never eat the food so that it goes bad. So make sure that you plan. Learn some basic recipes before you go abroad, but keep in mind that not everything available in the States will be available abroad. This is also a good way to learn more about your host culture if you have a kitchen available, because you can try some of the local recipes. Another great way to cut down on the cost of food is to get a meal card for the student dining hall. Once you get to your host university, see if they have a dining hall and if there is a way that you can use it, usually by getting a student ID card and adding money to it. If your program includes meals, such as if you are staying in a homestay, make sure that you eat the food provided. Finally, eating at restaurants is usually more expensive, so try to limit your trips to restaurants, cafes, food stands, etc. When thinking about local transportation, try to walk whenever possible. Also, figure out public transportation. The metro is usually the most convenient if your city has one, and it is usually fairly inexpensive. The bus usually takes longer, but it is also usually cheaper than any other form of public transportation. Finally, only splurge on a taxi if necessary. For example, if you have to go a long distance, you have a lot of luggage with you, it's late at night, etc. Finally, for your cell phone, use Wi-Fi whenever possible, and make sure to make use of the free apps that were mentioned in the previous slide. As far as miscellaneous items, use the same strategies that you would at home. Compare prices, Don't buy things that you don't need, etc. Also, ask locals where they shop, because people who live in your host city will usually know the best place that has the most inexpensive prices. There are also other recurring expenses that you need to think about. Again, if your bank charges a flat fee for withdrawing money, withdraw as much as you feel comfortable with at a time so that you make less trips to the ATM and don't incur as many ATM fees. Also, if you're studying abroad for a longer length of time, gym memberships and laundry may be more relevant expenses. As far as exercising, observe if it is socially acceptable to run at parks or around the neighborhood in your city, and see if your university has any facilities or if they offer a membership to their gym for a competitive rate. For laundry, you will have to wash your own clothes while you are abroad, even if you are at a homestay. If you are at a homestay, washing your laundry is usually free, but they may want you to buy your own detergent. If you are staying at a dorm or an apartment, usually you will use the laundromat. See if you can wash things by hand in the sink or shower, or hang clothes to dry on drying racks to save money on dryers. As far as saving money on additional expenses, there are several methods that you can use to do this. Make sure that you pack your student ID card from the University of Kentucky, and also see if you can get a student ID card from your host institution. If you have a student ID card, usually when you go to tourist and historical sites, they will give you some kind of discount. Also, don't go to restaurants all the time. If you have the ability, cook food in your apartment or residence. Often, there are a lot of free attractions in your city or region. If money is tight as far as additional expenses, at the beginning of your program, think about what sites with more expensive admission that you really want to see and which ones you can go without seeing so that you are able to prioritize. Before you go to any site, go online to sites such as Predeparture and read reviews, because a lot of times fellow travelers will let you know if the attraction is a must-see or if it's overrated and you would be better off not spending your money. Additionally, TripAdvisor is just a good resource in general because they will have suggestions of other attractions and activities in your city. Also, almost every city has some sort of reduced price ticket if you see more than one attraction or if you buy your admission online. This can be found out by just Googling or going to the city's tourism website. As far as independent travel, when you look for accommodations, try not to stay in hotels unless it is the only option available. Sites like Hostelworld and Airbnb are good resources for finding affordable accommodations. For transportation, compare flight prices on sites such as Kayak, Expedia, or Skyscanner. Consider using a budget airline such as Ryanair, keeping in mind that you will not be able to pack as much and will usually just take a carry-on, but they are very good for short trips. Also, think about alternative forms of transportation, such as buses, trains, etc. Buses and trains will take longer, but sometimes they are much cheaper than flying in a plane. Another additional expense that you need to think about is souvenirs. As far as souvenirs for yourself, think about alternative ways of remembering your time abroad. Photographs, ticket stubs, journals, etc. are good ways to remember your time abroad, and a lot of times they may have more personal value. Remember that you'll be likely to take back more with you than you took initially, so try to keep souvenirs small so that you can fit them into your suitcase. Think about the weight restrictions for the airline that you're taking back home, as well as any custom fees that you might have to pay. Additionally, if you plan to buy food products to bring back, keep in mind that some agricultural products are not allowed back inside the US, so make sure that you do your research. Finally, I'll end with some general advice tips. Your first week in the country, write down every single thing that you spend money on. You can do this simply on the Notes app on your smartphone, or you can bring a small notebook and pen with you. This is going to give you a rough estimate of how much you'll be spending every week or every day in the country, although you do need to keep in mind that you will almost always spend more in the first week purchasing items such as shampoo, detergent, etc. It also will give you a better idea of sections that are more difficult to budget, such as food. You can also look at all of your purchases and see where you're spending too much money. Also, always make sure to ask other people for tips. Each program will have different resources. If you are on a UK-sponsored or UK consortia program, ask your faculty director. If you are on a UK partner program, ask the on-site staff. If you are on a UK exchange or direct program, ask the staff at the International Center or other local students. Also, to clarify, when you ask them for advice, don't ask them such general questions as, what is the best way to budget while abroad? But more questions such as, where do local people buy their groceries? Or, is there a reliable bus system that will take me from point A to point B so that I don't have to take a taxi? Finally, you can never do enough research. Read blogs of people who either just travel in general and take note of the ways that they cut down on costs, or blogs of people who live in the city where you'll be living to see what is the cheapest or most convenient way of buying items, taking local transportation, etc. Use sites such as TripAdvisor, Lonely Planet, etc. Also, consider picking up a guidebook before you go. Lonely Planet, again, is usually a helpful one. Guidebooks will also give you price estimates of restaurants, accommodations, etc. Finally, here are some online resources that could be helpful. Numbeo will give you a good idea of a cost of living. I mentioned earlier, it's usually a good idea to have an idea of how much you will be spending on groceries, etc. Another resource is Half the Luggage, Double the Money. It's a PDF that just has a lot of good advice, tips in general. Finally, xe.com is a currency converter and is useful for finding out how much money you will be spending, not how much money you will be spending, but what the conversion rate is for the currency that you will be using while you are abroad. So I hope that this webinar has been helpful for all of you guys, and I hope that you guys have a great time abroad.